I want to introduce our distinguished speaker. So I'm delighted to welcome Robin Barnwell to Stony Brook and the Marie Colvin Center.
Thank you.
His lecture is going to be on zones of conflict, the art of investigative documentary filmmaking. And Robin is the distinguished winner of the 2025 Scripps Howard Journalism Award for Excellence for his brilliant documentary, A Year of War, Israelis and Palestinians. And I also want you to know that he's won an Emmy as well. He won the International Emmy for his film on Mariupol in 2023 on Ukraine, A People's Story. And very much like Marie Colvin herself, Robin puts people at the heart of his investigative storytelling. Anyway, I want to thank the Scripps Howard Fund for sponsoring this important talk with Robin. And we're very lucky to have him here and he's going to tell us about his extraordinary life and work. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I'm really touched and honoured to be here with you and all. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks to Stony Brook and to the wider staff and team. Yeah, I'm a journalist, filmmaker, and a cinematographer. So that's me at the airport. If you ever see someone at an airport with all of that stuff, that's me heading off to Ukraine to make a film about Putin's stolen children, how thousands of children were taken from Ukraine to Russia during the current conflict. More on that later. But I wanted to just say that this is a great opportunity to see you all, because I know that some of you are about to head off into your professional careers in the not too distant future. And journalism, I'm sure you've heard from many people, is such an important profession, especially at this time when so much misinformation, disinformation in the world. Your futures are hopefully going to be very bright. I'm sure that Stony Brook is setting you on a very positive path, and I'm very enthused by everything you're doing. I've just been with a class of some of you here, and just really inspired by the stories that you're already starting to tell. Basically, I work a lot for Frontline PBS, so I'm a sort of although I'm British, I do get involved in American journalism a lot. And obviously the teams, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Frontline PBS's work, I'm sure you probably are. Their mission is to carry out investigative journalism that questions and explains our world. And in some way, the investigations that they've carried out over the years have done sort of extraordinary work that have led to various social change and other key changes. But to start with, I'm going to tell you a little short story. It's September 2006. I'm on a rather dodgy old little plane, African Express Airways, from Nairobi in Kenya to Mogadishu in Somalia, to cover the story of the first Islamic revolution since 9/11, the attacks on the World Trade Center. I'm a little nervous because a month previous, a Channel 4 journalist was killed, shot dead, and a few months previous to that, or just before, Kate Payton from the BBC was also murdered. So Mogadishu had become a no-go zone for international journalists. But we forged a relationship, from outside the country with the Islamic courts, the new de facto government of Somalia, and we received an invite to report on what they were doing. On arrival in Mogadishu, we were warned about a man called Aden Hashi Farah Iro, who was wanted by the CIA. He was the leader of an Al-Qaeda affiliate called Al-Shabaab. We were told he didn't like Brits or Americans, and that we should avoid any eye contact with him. But as he was actually staying at our hotel, we guessed that was going to be a bit difficult. Not a great start. My nerves subsided slightly over lunch when one of the members of the government, the Islamic government there, looked me in the eyes and declared that he'd Googled me. I was a little surprised because Googling had only just entered the lexicon in 2006. But as a result of that Googling, he was reassured that actually I wasn't working for the CIA, I was actually a journalist. I'm not too sure how he figured that out, but or came to that conclusion. But my reporter and I spent the next 3 weeks with amazing access to the Islamic courts. Without incident, we ended up making this film, Somalia, Hearts, Minds and Holy War. I even struck up a conversation with the CIA's wanted man, Iro, and he gave us a trip out to the front line where the Ethiopian army on the other side was preparing to invade. Iro was killed in an American drone strike in 2008. The Ethiopian army invaded, and the Islamic courts was overthrown in 2007. I'm telling you this story not to highlight any personal bravado, probably more dangerous recklessness, but to highlight how the world has changed for filmmakers and journalists over the course of my career. The kind of access my colleague and I got, to the Islamic courts and the Al-Qaeda affiliate wouldn't be given today. These organizations have their own media outlets. They don't need the sort of traditional mainstream, so-called mainstream media to report for them. And, and obviously we're seeing, these organizations would trust the Western media. Obviously we're seeing that in our own countries as well, Western nations, as the so-called traditional media is challenged by the new. But I've always been, as that photo suggests, somebody who is happiest in the field. I like reporting from the field, I like getting to the story, however potentially dangerous that is. If I can report firsthand on the ground, that's what I'm going to do, like lots of other journalists. But I've had to adapt over the years, because there are lots of countries now where I just can't step foot. They wouldn't give me visa access, they know who I am, they can look me up online. The rise of authoritarianism globally and the restrictions on journalists, sadly in Western countries as well, it's become difficult for us to sort of do our jobs on the ground. And I'd like to talk to you about this today, this change in my career and how things have gone. Because whether you want to be a print journalist or a filmmaker, I think some of the things I'm going to tell you are relevant for you today. I mean, one of the big challenges, in our industry is always getting started. How do you actually get, going on a story? The first question I always ask myself is, how are we going to take the journalism forward? How are we going to advance our viewers, readers' understanding of the subject? And how are we going to tell the story in an exciting, engaging way? And I want to kind of give you a few examples. In 2017, people started going missing in northwest China. By the time I started looking at the story in 2018, the Chinese government had placed more than 1 million Muslims in specially built camps. It was actually the largest incarceration of an ethnic population since the Second World War. The BBC had been on the ground, but the Chinese government had basically prevented them from really covering the story. And their reporting was powerful with some academics, but it wasn't telling a bigger picture. I thought the larger frame for the documentary was to sort of cover a new form of governance that's being developed to control humans through technology, which is called digital authoritarianism. And when historians look back at the kind of origins of this digital authoritarianism, I think that probably Xinjiang will be a feature, and the Uyghurs will be seen as their sort of first kind of victims. Now, having researched this and sort of got the concept, I want to tell the story of the Uyghurs, but I also want to tell the bigger story of digital authoritarianism and the export of surveillance technology around the world to repress humans, and to tell the story of how the Uyghurs are these sort of the guinea pigs in this laboratory. So that's what I thought would take the journalism forward. But how was I going to get access to that story? How am I going to get... Now, in the old days, I would have got on a plane to China. I would have hoped that I might be able to get out to Xinjiang. But, I wasn't going to get a visa to do that story. It's something the Chinese government didn't want. That's not a story they wanted to have told. So this brings me back. There's been a lot of eyes in this talk so far, and I apologize for that. But I would emphasize that one of the key things which everyone in this room, I hope, will understand, is that journalism is often teamwork. You're only as good as your team, and who you select to work with can make or break a project. We're judged on delivery, right? And what you put on the screen for people to watch and what we write matters, there's nothing more than the delivery. So what was, so I started forming a team, and I decided the only way that you could basically we decided that the only way to sort of get to the story was essentially to hire, to build an undercover team who could sort of go to Xinjiang and help tell the story for us. We were going to do the filming outside Xinjiang, we were going to do other elements of the story, but to actually get to take the journalism forward, we needed to get on the ground. And we've got to take into account also that, if I turned up in Xinjiang, I'm going to basically, the people I'm going to talk to, I'm going to put at risk. So even if I could get to the story in that case, I was feeling that as obviously a white British man, I was going to stand out. I was going to basically endanger my sources, endanger the interviewees. So we decided to go for an undercover. But then you have to select, your undercover team, right? So you have to select who you're using. And, then you think, how are we actually going to, who's going to get into this story for us? Now, we decided the Han Chinese, the largest ethnic group in China. And basically we thought that what we needed to do is have a Han Chinese undercover operator, because they're going to come under less surveillance and suspicion than the Uyghurs. They'll blend in, and crucially, the people that we're trying to target for interviews and secretly filmed interviews, they will be Han Chinese officials. So and this proved to be the case. We actually came up with a plan which we're able to execute. I'm just going to show you a brief clip from the documentary, which will explain our thinking.
So far, no journalist has been able to work freely in Xinjiang. So our best option is to film undercover. Uyghurs are under constant surveillance. Foreigners are followed and harassed. Only an ethnic Han Chinese will have the freedom to film for us. At last, we find someone willing to take up the challenge. He knows it presents real dangers.
我们也是冒着风险去做这个工作，这个对于全世界来说都很重要。
The Chinese filmmaker's undercover name is Li. Li is Han Chinese, part of China's ethnic majority, but even so, if caught, he'd face a long time in jail. Li's doing this because he doesn't like the direction in which China is heading.
就是外面的传言就说新疆的情况非常的严重，当地的人没有人权。
So, undercover operations are always incredibly nerve-wracking to run. First and foremost, you need to understand the risk versus the reward. Whether your undercover understands the risks and they're willing to take them, and what the consequences potentially could be if the operation goes wrong. I've posed as a tourist in the past, in Zimbabwe, when I was investigating the mass murder of informal diamond workers. I unfortunately turned up in Harare. I discovered my BBC press pass in my bag, which I hadn't destroyed, so that quickly got flushed down the toilet. But my undercover team, who was smuggling my kit in from South Africa, they actually forgot to bring my kit for some reason, so I then ended up kicking my heels. But we were able to finally get on with the job, and we were able to go around covertly filming, people who were witnesses, to what had happened. We gathered video and testimonial evidence, and we were able then to take our findings to the International Criminal Court in The Hague, and they were able to basically take that case forward. Obviously, Zimbabwe didn't hand over anyone. It was all linked very heavily to the higher echelons of the government, President Robert Mugabe at the time, who was the president. But again, that was sort of an example of how we're able to use, sort of undercover and secret filming to gather the evidence we wanted. I mean, one of the key things is obviously when you meet your team who've been, on the undercover operation, it's a bit of a mixture of emotions, because you're happy they're safe, but at the same time you're wondering, have they delivered? What have they got? And, I'm just going to show you a clip from this film, because our undercover Lee, in Xinjiang, who was there for a few weeks, he, again, was the aim of the film was to take the story forward, as I said, to show how the surveillance state was being built out, the Uyghurs were being the guinea pigs and suffering as a result, and how the export of this technology was going around the world. Now, on the target list, Lee's target list, we had essentially asked him to try and get into one of the surveillance companies on the ground in Xinjiang. Now, this was quite a big ask. He was posing as a businessman, and he went in to this surveillance company and was able to deliver something, an interview. I won't give you the whole, won't show everything, but it was quite a coup in terms of his achievement.
One of the leading Chinese technology companies working hand in hand with the government in Xinjiang is this one, Leon.
In Xinjiang Autonomous Region, Leon assists communication operators who jointly build information society bases on fifth generation.
Leon is a key actor, helping the authorities here build the most complete surveillance state in history.
With providing border security. In Xinjiang production and construction quarters, Leon helps Shihuzi's project of Tranquil City. In Kashgar, Leon supports local public security bureau in constructing and operating security and protection system.
Posing as a businessman with an interest in the tech sector, our undercover filmmaker Lee manages to get a meeting with Leon executives.
现在新疆做的安防的话，是全国来说国家是最上心的，主要提供像基于人脸呀，或者说是结构化。
您看到，就是每一条小路、每一条街道，它都会有摄像头，哪怕你只是一个小巷里面，它分出有不同的方向，它都会有摄像头，就是基本上是全方位覆盖。所以说，你可能看到觉得这个摄像头它只是一个摄像头，但是你其实不知道它可能就会被你的这个人，你在摄像头下面走过去，它会有你所有的信息，包括它会对你的整个行为轨迹，包括你的面部表情，包括你的很多东西，它会进行这种分析。
Our tech engineer explains what it's being used for.
Uyg'urlarniki chiroy ifodasini dastlabki chiroy ifodaları bu sistemda oldin selishtirilgan sonliq ma'lumotlar ombrishchiga kiritilgan. Shunga buningda asosan analiz qilinganlar tipik Uyg'urlar nuqtalik analiz qilindi. Analizga asosan kompüterda bu odamning xatarlik odam, normal odam yoki qisman benormal chiroy turmush sistemasi orqali uning harakatining jiddiy masalan odatsiz jugrab mana shuni oldin o'tib ketsangizmi sizni xatarlik holatga kirganingizda buni darhol jamoat xavfsizlik tarmoqlari yo urinishga opirdi va yoki qamoqxonaga opirdi.
Collaboration between the Chinese government and technology companies goes even further. We're about to be told by Leon executives that their companies are at the heart of a highly secret state project.
要在整个 整个全国乃至全世界，它现在整个安防这一块，它有很多非常成熟的这个解决方案，包括能够实际落地和应用的这样一些场景。
其实安防我表面2个字，但是其实有怎么样的一些运用呢？
这个具体的不方便多说，因为这个很多安防这方面它是涉及到涉密的，它是涉密的。
One of the great privileges of being a filmmaker and journalist is having people entrust you with their stories. With this trust comes great responsibility. I never show characters who feature in the film a cut in advance. I don't need them to love the film, but I do really want them to feel that we've fairly represented them and their views and handled their stories with the sensitivity it deserves. Investigation in journalism is central to the documentaries I make, but so critically is human emotion. I want the viewer to care about the subject, and neither the undercover nor the covert filming nor expert interviews are likely going to achieve this. Most stories you cover are going to have an emotional edge, and finding the right character to bring that across is going to be critical. Casting for the right characters is as important as creating the right team. But remember, the characters one features are part of the journalism. They're not just emotional props. They're carefully selected in order to make editorial points that one has thoroughly researched and verified. I've built whole films around characters whose testimony makes the key editorial points without feeling forced. The destruction of the Ukrainian city of Mariupol, which Sarah referred to earlier, is one such film. I mean, unlike this film on the Uyghurs, Mariupol had no narration and it ran for 90 minutes. But the intimate interviews with the characters had all gone through hell, had to tell of the story of the collapse and destruction of Mariupol in detail. So we did, tons of research charting how the Russian army, with their, with their some of their allies from east of Ukraine, had basically dismantled and destroyed this entire city, and so we wanted it to be essentially a kind of almost a chart of a war crime that we could sort of break down, and our characters were going to tell that story. So we basically methodically built out this picture. But also the other key thing I wanted to bring across, and that's why the framing of the story was the people's story, because this was the largest civilian loss of life in a city since the Second World War. And so we wanted to kind of frame it as like, if you're an ordinary European citizen, what is it like to have, you're living your life one day, taking the kids to school. The next day, you've got one of the world's largest, most sort of, war crimes-driven armies on the planet heading your way and basically destroying your city. And you have no way to escape. There were people eventually who got out, but they were all, that was basically for the first few weeks, it was pretty much impossible to leave. And so that was the kind of focus. I've learned that interviewing people, and particularly just in the immediate aftermath of events, of course, you do that for news, that's important. But I think if you wait a little while, sometimes, not too long, you don't have to wait years, but months, you can get some really incredibly powerful interviews from people who've been through extreme trauma. And again, that's a sort of the whole essence of building a bond with the characters of your films or your articles, digital pieces. That's the important thing. And for me, the key driver is always how to humanize the victims, to let viewers, to bring, make them sympathetic characters. I want people to feel for these people. One of the most memorable interviews I did was with a Ukrainian doctor who had been in Mariupol. She had lost her home, most of her possessions, and was living in another part of Ukraine with her family. She hadn't given us an interview to anyone before. It was journalistically, again, part of what I wanted to put together as an account of alleged Russian war crimes, the bombing of the maternity hospital and the death of a mother and her child. I had to watch this interview back time and time again when I was editing it, and it never failed to deeply upset me. Just warn that some of the images are a little bit might be on the nose. So this is also for broadcast, so people should be okay. But just wanted to warn you.
Я как увидела рану, я сразу поняла, что ситуация тяжелая будет. И я очень хорошо помню, что она взяла меня за руку, ну, то есть она как-то так схватила меня даже за руку, вот так вот сжала и говорит: пожалуйста, не спасайте меня, я не хочу жить. И когда уже извлекли ребенка, ребенок был без признаков жизни. И я видела своих коллег, которые просто у них слезы текли просто ручьем. Я ничего страшнее в своей жизни не видела. Это просто как мы запаковывали в черный мешок женщину молодую с ее ребеночком. Вот так вот ей под грудь положили.
The art of persuasion is something you're going to need to refine over your careers. Our business is often about persuading people to do things that they don't necessarily want to do, or which don't necessarily come naturally to them. As I said, we often spend, in my business in documentary making, I'm sort of have a luxury of time sometimes in order to build relationships. In news, obviously, you're gathering on the ground, and you might not have that same luxury. But I mean, for me, it's about, it's one of the trickiest parts of the job, but it's the psychology, and that's a big part of our work. Is basically psychology, reassuring people, building trust, building a relationship, and it's one of the most satisfying parts of the job. And it's our ability to empathy, our ability to empathise with other humans, which is particularly important. I just want to. I know that some of you have already seen the Israelis and Palestinians film, and I don't want to sort of run through everything all over again on that particular film, but I wanted just to kind of show you one clip. This was I've got two here, one with an Israeli and one with a Palestinian. I'm just going to show you the Palestinian. This was I can show both if I've got time. That's great.
Not everyone will have viewed the documentary.
Yeah. Gali was Gali Adan. Was somebody. I mean, again, the Israeli and Palestinians film was a really difficult one to make because, I'd been to Gaza before. But as I'm sure everyone's aware in this room, the Israeli government won't allow international journalists into Gaza. So, although I'd been there before, it was a war, the first war that I've actually covered, as it were, by not actually being there. But again, a little bit like with Mariupol, where I didn't actually go there either, but I went to Ukraine. It's about finding clever ways in which to tell the story. So in which case, obviously on the Israeli side, one was able to interview Israelis, although that was quite difficult because they're quite distrusting of European journalists. They sort of feel we're pro-Palestinian and less sort of. But obviously, so it's important to obviously maintain that credibility and maintain that objectivity. And so it took me a long time to actually persuade this one person, Gali Adan, whose husband had been taken hostage and whose daughter had been killed. But I wanted to choose Gali as part of the documentary because her story was incredible, and also the visuals with her story were incredible. And so I wanted people to look at what had happened on October the 7th, whatever your views on the conflict. I wanted people to look at this particular person as a human being who had something terrible happen to them. And I'll show you the Palestinian clip in a second. But this is the first one is with Gali.
ואז קיבלנו דעה מהביטחון לנעול דלתות וחלונות בממ"ד ולהיות בשקט. מהרגע הזה אנחנו פשוט בפחד נוראי, באימה. אנחנו שומעים מישהו הולך על זכוכיות בבית. אני מנסה לחשוב מה אפשר לעשות, ואני תופסת את יעל. צחי תופס את הידית של הדלת ומנסה להתנגד. מעיין קפצה על הדלת לעזור לצחי והם ירו בדלת. ואז הם נכנסים, פותחים את האור. ואני רואה את צחי יושב עם ידיים מגואלות בדם. הוא אומר לי לא, 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 לא. הוא אומר גלי, תעזרי לה. ואני עוברת אל הגוף שלה לאט לאט כדי לבדוק איפה היא נפגעה, כי לא הבנתי. ואני רואה אני עולה עד לראש עם עיניים פקוחות, ואני עושה ככה ואני מרגישה את הפגיעה והיא קריטית. ומאותו רגע אני אומרת לצחי, צחי איננה, אין.
We made this film, including Israelis and Palestinians. Obviously, this was a year ago, and obviously the Gaza war has gone on, for another whole year. Would we've made it differently, knowing, obviously the situation now? I think at the time what we wanted to do was we wanted to again show, Israelis and Palestinians and how the war, October the 7th, and the war in Gaza had impacted their views about each other. So that was sort of a critical part of the storytelling. We wanted to essentially, have sympathetic, empathetic characters who we could sort of understand how their perception had changed on sort of subjects like the two-state solution and all of that. It was a very uncomfortable and difficult film to make. I got a lot of flack from everyone, basically, from Israelis and Palestinians. But it was, I think it was important that we told the story sort of looking, because what happened and what's happened over the last 2 years is going to impact the region and people for decades to come. A major change during my career, which is obviously going to be very important for yours, is obviously how much people film themselves. And so again, the two stories, both of Gaza and Mariupol, in the past, not getting to the story would have been a real problem, and it would have been very, very difficult to cover that story. I mean, probably impossible, certainly for television. But with nowadays, people filming themselves, with social media accounts, we were able with Gaza to set up a team inside Gaza, but also from the UK to scour thousands of social media accounts to basically find the kind of footage that we felt was important to tell the story of Palestinians in Gaza. And the characters, our character hunt and search was based on obviously people who had the strongest archive. One of the other factors was, of course, we didn't want to ask Palestinian journalists who were already dying in huge numbers to go and take risk for us. We wanted to basically have a situation where we would have essentially found characters. We'd verified that they weren't, they weren't sort of part of Hamas or, because that wasn't what we were trying to show, that they were ordinary victims, and basically to look at them and gather their social media. Then we would get our journalist, our Gazan team, to go and do the interview with these people, and we construct the story. And getting the footage out of Gaza was an absolute nightmare, because the internet was often down. There was very, very little. We had 4G. We basically ended up, lots of journalists were basically around hospitals. They were using the generators from hospitals, but as the hospitals started getting hit and blown up, that opportunities to get the footage out became much more difficult. We did finally get all of our footage out, as you see from the film. And we were very lucky to be able to tell the story from northern Gaza, which was at that time incredibly difficult to access. The producer who was working on that story has unfortunately been killed. But we were able to get the story out of this one young woman, Garda, who I'm going to show you now because we were particularly moved by her story and the archive that she'd gathered. Her brother was killed and her father was killed.
موجود يؤدي رسالة. محمد كان موجود معنا عشان يقوم فينا بفترة المجاعة. بحس إنه الله سخره لإلنا. قصف هواية كتير جامدة. أمي بتعيط كانت فقالت لي محمد استشهد. قلت لها لا تمزحي. بالشارع وقعت بالشارع ما قدرت أتحمل. صرت أجري. ضليت أجري من المكان اللي أنا كنت فيه من الصحابة للمعمداني. وكان ابن عمتي واقف عنده قلت له لا مش محمد صح؟ قال لي لا هو. فقلت له معلش ورجيني ورجاني. صرت أقول لهم طب كيف استشهد؟ ابن عمتي حكى لي الهواية اللي سمعناها قبل شوي هي المحل تبع أبوكي. الله ندور على مشتاق لأبويا هيك شي موجود. حاول أدور على أي إشي لأبويا، أي حاجة اللي ممكن يدفن فيها ولا أي أثر إله موجود. حبيبي الله يرحمه. يعني ما أعرفش عنه إشي ولا أشوفه ولا أودعه إذا بدي أزوره. مش هعرف أزوره. الله يرحمه. أصلا هو مش مستشهد، كثير بيجيني بالحلم إنه هو منيح بس هو مصاب، فبتخيل إنه بأي لحظة رح يفوت علينا. أوقات بيجيني بالحلم إنه هو مبسوط هو ومحمد وبضحكوا. كان اللي خليها شوكولاتة هنا يعني هلا لينا عمرها 3 سنين فهي يتيمة، تسأل بابا وين، فكتير بتهرب منها، بحاول إنه أنسي هذا الإشي لأنه ما عندي أي إجابة صريحة لها.
So we were still able to cover the story, even though we can get access on the ground. But then, of course, when you're not with your teams, you've got obviously the verification process, all the kind of boring stuff that we probably don't want to do. That also becomes really important. So the risk assessment writing, the compliance checks for lawyers, the verification is absolutely essential. We verify everything, right? Otherwise, what's the point of us being journalists? We enter into the disinformation world. We basically have to verify. The process that I go through on Frontline, and I'm really proud of American journalism because I think you guys are really big on this, and we are big in this in the UK as well, but I just think you're at another level, and I really think that American journalism is all the better for that. I have to gird myself each time the Frontline fact check happens and the verification process, but it's an incredible process to go through. I learn something about every single time, and I think journalism in this country, in lots of places, in lots of good ways, is in a good place, and and obviously there are some problems as well. But for the final part of this talk, I just want to quickly bring us back to investigating. Because there's nothing more exciting than running an active journalistic investigation, especially when you start to make progress in unexpected ways. I'm going to take you back to Ukraine. I went back to Ukraine in 2023. I was leading a team investigating, as I mentioned, the stealing of thousands of Ukrainian children from Russian-occupied areas. The number of cases was big, but it was actually surprisingly difficult to tell the story. It was the middle of the war. There were still going on. The Ukrainians had secret channels open to speak to the Russians and trying to get their children back. So obviously families were worried about the stigma of admitting that their children had been taken to Russia, or allegedly taken to Russia. Many journalists were all telling the same story, so it was like a sort of real problem. I had the news operations chasing this. I was up against them, when I was also trying to do a documentary. But we had to find an accessible and compelling way to make the film that gave the macro story, but also told it through the micro. And I decided to follow, after some time, a Ukrainian woman who was investigating the disappearance of children from a children's home in Kherson. And Kherson was right on the front line. It was actually, it was taken by the Russians in the first part of the war, and then taken back by the Ukrainians. We set up again a team. So we had ICE Stories, which is an online investigation team, the Russian based out of Czech Republic. We basically were then trying to find this 2-year-old girl called Margarita, who'd been taken from this children's home. Again, the team building behind all of this was super important to bring together a group of investigative journalists and filmmakers. Now I'm going to just show you a clip from this film, because we sort of threw everything at it. We went on the dark web. We got sort of documents from inside Russia. We were just trying to track down and identify, who might have stolen this 2-year-old child. Now, of course, just one 2-year-old child, right? But Margarita, that's her name, was just one of 20,000 and maybe more children who have been stolen by the Russians. And it's a war crime to steal children. So I just want to quickly show you this.
After that, we'll break up for questions.
Yes.
That's all right, because I know some people had to leave, but
Sorry.
But we can go on we can go on longer.
Yeah, I'm just going to quickly show you this clip, and this just gives you an idea of how we had to sort of find an accessible and interesting way to tell the story, and how we went about actually nailing the discovery. This is just a short part from the film.
Це вивезення є окремою категорією злочину, тому що воно має не такі ознаки скоєння злочину, як інші незаконні депортації з будь-якого регіону в будь-який час після вторгнення.
The filmmakers and Russian investigators are helping Victoria and Diana trace the whereabouts of Ukrainian children Margarita and Ilya. Using the online market for documents from inside Russia, it's possible to find out more about the woman in lilac, Inna Varlamova. We found train records confirming that Varlamova arrived in occupied Ukraine on the same day that Margarita and Ilya were taken from the Kherson Children's Home by armed men. That night, Varlamova, having booked 4 seats on a train, returned to Moscow. The search for documents also reveals she got married soon after she returned to Moscow. Her husband, a high-profile Russian politician called Sergei Mironov. He's the leader of a major political party, Just Russia.
Mironov Sergei Mikhailovich.
Mironov is a key ally of President Putin. He's been sanctioned by the UK and the EU since 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea.
Уже в ближайшее время вся Новороссия будет в составе Российской Федерации. Наша сила в правде, победа будет за нами. России быть великой! Ура!
Він політик дуже високого масштабу. Він звичайний путінський прихлібатель. Путінська маріонетка. 100%.
Digging further, we found that Inna Varlamova was involved in a civil court case, but details about it were sealed. The court hearing took place only weeks after her marriage to Sergei Mironov. Through our dark market online contacts, we uncovered a document that shows the nature of the case. We found an adoption record. We shared it with Victoria and Diana.
Ребенок, дитина, да? Миронова Марина Сергіївна, Батражнин 31 октября 21 року. Як Маргарита. Як Маргарита. Я в шокі. Я теж. Я помогаю просто. Але це саме та інформація, якої нам не вистачало. Але це ж неймовірно.
Буде прийняти на 12-ту.
Треба ще раз подивитися.
Margarita's date of birth is on the adoption record. It shows her name has been changed to Marina, her place of birth to Russia, and her new parents as Inna Varlamova and Sergei Mironov.
Коли я побачила, що дата народження стоїть така сама, як у Маргарити, я зрозуміла, що це бінго.
The documents show a close ally of Vladimir Putin adopted a child after his wife had taken her from Ukraine. Under international law, removing a child from their home country with no intention of giving them back is a war crime. This year, a documentary about Sergei Mironov's life was broadcast on Russian television.
Вот там вот иллюстрация книги.
Так это все эпизоды из вашей жизни? Вся жизнь в картинке?
Ну, в принципе, ну да.
Откуда все начинается?
Mironov showed the Russian filmmakers his paintings.
Что это за картина, Сергей?
Эта жизнь продолжается.
А вы тут счастливый?
Конечно.
We asked for a response, a right to reply. Surprisingly, we didn't get one. Not surprisingly. We did find a video online later on showing the baptism of Margarita, with both Mironov and Varlamova present. Thank you for bearing with me. Thanks so much. I mean, I did have very few words for you of potential wisdom, maybe not. I mean, never give up. Journalists are incredibly tenacious. You've got to be resilient. These qualities will help you get into the business too. Just keep going. Our work can be lonely. Form bonds with other journalists, share your experiences. Mental health is so important as well. Our business is stressful, emotionally draining, and we often get to be in very traumatic situations. Sometimes, hopefully, you won't find yourself in too many of them. But and I also wanted to say this: as journalists, we use social media to promote or bring attention to stories. But remember, we're journalists, not activists. There is an important difference in this. It's important we care about the stories we're covering and the people we feature in them. But we're supposed to be objectively reporting the facts rather than be campaigners. I'm an activist. I've got nothing against activists. They're great. They do a just different job from us. We're journalists, not activists. And anyway, I thank you so much.